The news from Dorchester this week goes all the way from neighborhood locations to City Hall and the nation's capital, ranging from playground improvements to the race for mayor and the second impeachment of President Trump. Putting that all together for us is the managing editor and publisher of the Dorchester Reporter, Bill Forry. Thank you very much for being with us, Bill.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be back.
Bill, good to see you again as well. We didn't think we'd be talking about topics like this today, but I want to start with the impeachment vote because this is a historic thing for the whole country. No surprise that all the Democrats representing Massachusetts and Washington voted for the impeachment, but what's the most relevant thing, especially from the local members of Congress?
Well, Chris, we did have a chance to speak to a couple of our delegates. Congressman Stephen Lynch, I spoke to him on Tuesday about his experience, which during the Capitol Hill riot, the pro-Trump rioting on last Wednesday, he of course was in Washington. He was participating in the Electoral College count, or was intending to, but Congressman Lynch wasn't able to get to the House chamber. Probably in a fortunate sense for him, he was trapped by the crowd that had assembled somewhere near the Russell office building, which is close to where he lives. And so he sequestered himself and his staff at his apartment and wrote it out there, and of course made it to Capitol Hill later. He describes in the article we wrote kind of the disruption and the taste of pepper spray still being in the air when he did return. He was one of the first people back in the building after the rioters had been cleared. So it's an interesting take from him. He's obviously quite concerned still about not only the impeachment. Of course, he's in favor of impeachment. He voted to impeach the president. He's quite concerned about the security situation in Washington, D.C. around the Capitol, and went on the record with us about those concerns. He, of course, has been briefed, as have other members of Congress, about the security threat to the Capitol, to the inauguration events. And he's quite concerned. And he did talk about all of the preparations that are being made and the roughly 15,000 National Guard troops who are being deployed to Washington. And yet still he was concerned about the prospect of violence in Washington next week, as I think we all are. We also spoke to Senator Ed Markey, he was in the Capitol complex when the rioting happened. He was safe in his office and was able to stay there until he could return and of course vote and take the floor, as he did in the Senate, to speak for the Electoral College vote and now for impeachment. He'll be a juror at some point in the future here. We expect that the Senate will take up. The House has approved their article of impeachment, and it now goes to the Senate. When that is taken up, of course, is still an open question. One other member of Congress representing us, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, I know you've mentioned in your program, is safe, but had a harrowing day on Wednesday with her husband. They were exposed to COVID, apparently, in the safe room that they were ushered to. And unfortunately, Conan Harris, her spouse, has COVID, is positive, and all of us, I think all of our constituents, are very concerned for him and for her health as well.
I want to run by you what this all says about the tone of things, because there has been this back and forth politically, left and right, that, well, maybe what happened at the Capitol is on par with a demonstration that goes off the rails and Wendy's gets torched. Is that an equivalency that you can buy into?
No, and I don't think any reasonable person would. I mean, this is an assault on democracy, assault on the democratic, the peaceful transfer of power. It was apparently a coordinated effort, and there is an ongoing coordinated effort, reportedly through federal authorities, to try to disrupt the ultimate swearing in of the president-elect and the vice president-elect. There's nothing on par with this that we've seen in our history, aside from the insurrection of the 1860s, in which obviously, even in that instance, the U.S. Capitol building was never besmirched or invaded in that sense. But that's the last equivalency that I can point to. Nothing in terms of civil disobedience or protests, movements of any of our lifetimes is equivalent to storming the Capitol and attempting to injure or worse, harm members of Congress.
Well, I wouldn't say we're going to have an insurgency in Boston, but we are going to have regime change in the mayor's office. So what do you see there?
Chris, yes, we will have a new mayor, and it'll be our first mayor first Black mayor and our first female mayor in the form of Kim Janey. Kim Janey is the city councilor from District 7, represents Roxbury South End and parts of Dorchester as well. And Kim Janey will ascend to the mayor's office and be the chief executive of the city for at least a few months and possibly longer. What's happening right now, of course, Mayor Walsh's nomination as labor secretary for the Biden administration will mean that he will be confirmed by the U.S. Senate, most likely in sometime in February, Chris. Obviously, what's going on in Washington has a lot to do with the timing, whether there'll be any delay caused by the impeachment. But the U.S. Senate is the body that will seat Mayor Walsh as Secretary Walsh sometime probably after Valentine's Day is the current thinking, or around then. At that point, the mayor would be obliged to resign his seat. We do not expect him to resign his seat until he is confirmed. And at that moment, when he does resign, Councilor Janey will become acting Mayor Janey, and she will have the authority to, for example, send ordinances and create policy for the city. She will have some limits to her power from what we understand. There's still some evolving understanding of what her powers will be, but certainly she'll be the person in charge of, for example, creating the budget for the next year. And she will not, however, have the opportunity to vote on that budget as a councilor. She will remain the city council president and the acting mayor at the same time, but she will not have the power or the authority to vote on behalf of District 7 constituents because of the need for a separation of powers there, Chris. That precedent was set most recently in 1993 when Tom Menino became acting mayor and similarly then would not preside as the city council president any longer. What's in question now is when the election will be held to formally, elect a new 4-year mayor. It could happen as quickly as 3 months from the time that Mayor Walsh steps aside. That would be a special election. It's what the city charter calls for due to the rules that govern the city's the city council and the mayor. As they're set now, there would be a special election. Now, City Councilor Ricardo Arroyo has filed a home rule petition. It was debated vigorously yesterday by the City Council that would override that special election and just leave it for voters to decide Mayor Walsh's replacement in the fall, in September and November as regularly scheduled. This is an election year for mayor. And so Councilor Arroyo's argument is that we should just wait for that and not have a special. He says it'll be costly. It'll also be a little bit chaotic to have 4 different elections in the same calendar year for the same job. That is a controversial proposal. It also is a difficult one to succeed because it not only has to be approved by the city council and the mayor, but also by the legislature. This is a home rule petition that gets sent to Beacon Hill for approval by the legislature and the governor. If it were to pass and if it were to go through all the way, the election to succeed pick a successor for Mayor Walsh would be in September and November. Otherwise, if it's not, we're looking at probably, depending on when he leaves, May or June.
Well, if you held a special election, it would probably have to happen by the middle of the summer. That makes me think turnout might be lower. So I imagine there are some people out there saying, if you really want to engage the people of Boston in choosing who succeeds Marty Walsh, it probably is better to do it a bit later.
There is an argument to be made for that. I think part of Councilor Arroyo's pitch yesterday was that traditionally special elections do have a smaller turnout, and that disproportionately impacts communities of color. At the same time, there are multiple people, candidates of color, who are right now in the mix, including possibly Councilor Janey, who has not said yet whether she's running for election for a full term or not. We have City Councilor Andrea Campbell and City Councilor Michelle Wu, both in the race already. Of course, they've been in since last fall. And then there are multiple other candidates who are now emerging. John Barros is one of them. He's currently the economic secretary for Mayor Walsh, economic development secretary in his cabinet. Marty Martinez, who's the Health and Human Services cabinet member for the Walsh administration and has been the point person on the COVID response for Mayor Walsh, is also considering a candidacy. And Boston Police Commissioner William Gross is also considering a candidacy. So this field is likely to be quite diverse no matter when this election is held. But the timing of a special could impact who decides to get in and who doesn't. And conventional wisdom is also has it that, you know, waiting for the fall for September and November probably benefits Councilor Janey the most, were she to decide to run for a four-year term, in that it would give her a longer runway to consolidate power, raise money. She's not currently a candidate. And the two women who are very strong candidates already, who are in the field, Michelle Wu and Andrea Campbell, have already raised upwards of $500,000 each, have a pretty healthy coffer, and now that'll continue to grow. So there will be some urgency, I think, over the next few days for candidates who are mulling this over to fish or cut bait. Another notable name here is Anissa Asabi-George, who's also a citywide city councilor and is very much considering a run for this office. I think we should have a better picture of this time next week, Chris. We probably will have a field in place.
One more question about the timing, because I know the situation was slightly different as far as the timetable, but in 1993, when Tom Menino took over as acting mayor, he was not the automatic favorite, but he had more time to build himself into the position. So I guess it does make a difference when you hold the election.
It does. And in 1993, there was no trigger for a special election because Ray Flynn, who was the mayor ahead of Tom Menino, didn't leave for Washington, or actually he was nominated to be ambassador to the Vatican, and that appointment came later in the spring. So there wasn't a statutory trigger to have a special. There would be in this instance, most likely. But you're right. An acting mayor, whether or not that person had been considered a viable candidate ahead of that role, certainly becomes a viable candidate once they're the acting mayor and has power and the power to fundraise. And also don't forget, a very high profile, especially right now through the pandemic. Daily briefings will be likely. The person who's the mayor of the city in this moment especially will be quite prominent, not only in Boston, but throughout the state, in leading this response to COVID, a vaccine rollout that is likely to happen. And obviously right now, as Mayor Walsh said today, we're still dealing with this awful surge that he said we haven't seen since the first surge last spring. So a very daunting task ahead of acting Mayor Janey. I think everyone wishes her well and will be at her aid to help make it a smooth transition. And yet you do have this dynamic of a very competitive election and people who want to essentially take her job. So it's going to be a very interesting few weeks here. I don't expect the home rule petition issue to be resolved that quickly. It may take a couple of weeks. And so there'll be I think, some uncertainty for a bit here on how that will play out.
I know your papers had stories about improvements at Garvey Playground in the Ponset, and also about work starting on the dot block. How big a deal is that, and why?
Well, dot block is a massive project. If people know the area, I think we have some B-roll that shows Glover's Corner, and it's a massive, I believe it's about 5 acres of land right between Dorchester Ave and Hancock Street, which has always been industrial and pretty much run down. It'll be transformed in this project to something on the order of 460 units of housing, mixed use development, a big project for Dorchester, probably the biggest we've seen to date. There will be bigger down the line, probably here in Columbia Point, where I am, at the former Bayside Expo Center. But it's a sign, Chris, of the continued boom in Boston development-wise under the Walsh administration that continues now and will continue through into his successor's terms. This development, despite the pandemic and the otherwise injured economy, shows no sign of letting up. And this is the latest indication that people are continuing to invest and build, and look to Dorchester in particular as a frontier for that. The dot block project, we're told, will begin in earnest probably by the end of this first quarter of 2021. It'll be a big deal. It'll take a long time, probably a couple of years to finish, but it's going to get started. And that is a good sign for the economy and for this neighborhood.
And for continuation of updates on what's happening politically and otherwise, where should people look for that?
Well, I would recommend go to our website, .news.com, follow us on Twitter @.news, because these developments are happening literally just as we were on. One of the potential candidates for mayor, Representative Mikowitz, decided that he's not going to run. So this is literally unfolding as we speak, and will continue to. So do follow us online at .news.com or at Twitter @.news.
Will do. Thank you very much for taking your time to join us.
Thanks, Chris.
That's Bill Forry from the Dorchester Reporter. We'll have more news in just a moment.